Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of The Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is David Chalmers. David is an Australian philosopher and cognitive scientist. He specializes in the area of philosophy of mind and philosophy of language. He's a professor of philosophy and neuroscience at New York University, as well as co-director of NYU's Center for Mind, Brain, and Consciousness. His latest book is Reality Plus, and that's plus with a plus sign, Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy, published about a week ago, January 25th, by Norton. He's also written The Conscious Mind, toward a Science of Consciousness, Philosophy of Mind, The Character of Consciousness, and Constructing the World. And he spent a lot of time with my hero, Douglas Hofstadter. So hopefully we can talk about that. So the question is, who the hell are we? If we're anybody, and if we are, prove it. So lots of folks from the ancient Greeks, Plotinus, I always liked that name, Plotinus, as well as a cadre of other philosophers, and more recently Descartes, John Locke, Aldous Huxley, and which I like, a bunch of recent authors, many of whom I've interviewed. David says a system has to be conscious to have any value. The more consciousness, the more value. But beyond that and how they are connected, I really don't have any clear idea. Well, I don't either, so theoretically we could stop there. But since we're both here, presumably, we may as well have a go at it. So welcome, David, and thanks very much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks. It's a real pleasure to be here talking to you.
Well, let's start this way. One of us wrote this book. Which one?
I say it was me. It took me a while too. It took me 5 years or so. Blood, sweat, and tears. I was conscious of that. I remember that. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I do. Sure. Yeah, it took me 6 years, and I decided to use your name instead of mine. But I don't have a whole bunch.
You just wrote that book by programming a little David Chalmers simulation to write the book for you, and that's what I'm remembering now. Damn you.
And I could be Eliza, and it's going to take you at least 20 minutes, except I'm kind of a jackass, so it's easier because it's hard for AIs to be jackasses because of the sarcasm and cynicism.
Are you telling me that the real David Chalmers just rented out this simulation of him to you to help you write your book?
You can't prove otherwise.
Yeah, and all these experiences I have of being the real David Chalmers are just like deep fake memories.
Within 10 years, it could easily be, based on what you've posited with regard to the metaverse, although Facebook dropped a quarter of its value yesterday.
And you just send off this simulation of you to run off and do these interviews every day while you can stay back and
oh yeah, I'm in
go
bed
fishing
now. Yeah, I'm sleeping now, and I have like 700 of these. Actually, I just did all 700 at once.
Okay, why not? Parallel.
But so enough of that. I'll tell you one thing though, and it's interesting. In the last, everybody who writes about consciousness, whether they're a neuroscience person or a psychiatrist, they all have kind of like their bailiwick. And I've used my search feature in my iPad to see if any of these books about consciousness have ever used the word solipsism, and yours doesn't. And just like we were joking about now, if it is a solipsistic universe, one of us isn't here. But that's another one. How can you refute that? And if you can't, would you act any differently if indeed it was a solipsistic universe?
I'm going to take that as a challenge now. I bet I can find the word solipsism somewhere in the book. I do discuss the ideas of one philosopher, Grace Helton, who's a philosopher at Princeton University, who takes seriously the idea that solipsism might be true, that she might be the only one in the universe, partly by thinking about people who run simulations of the universe, which is one of the big themes of this book. So, well, one way to run a simulation of the universe is to simulate absolutely everybody and have billions of conscious beings there. But there might be very strong ethical constraints on doing that. You've got to create 1 billion people who'll be suffering, who'll go through trauma, who'll go through wars. maybe there'll be strong ethical constraints, like only simulate one person's consciousness at a time to minimize this kind of suffering and trauma. If that's right, then people may well build simulated universes where there is just one conscious being. And then you have to ask the question, well, could that be happening to me now? Could I be just living in a simulation centered on this guy? Of course, megalomania lies that way, which is why it's not a stable thought to entertain solipsism. There's this famous story about Bertrand Russell gave a talk about solipsism, and someone comes up to him afterwards and says, well, of course I'm a solipsist, Mr. Russell. Isn't everybody?
Yeah, it's funny because I interviewed this guy, Frank Wilczek, who's a Nobel laureate. He discovered time crystals. And since I was a kid, I always wondered, why is one not a prime number? Because it's divisible by one and itself.
Good question.
And no one, they get pissed off at me when I ask it. But he said, honestly and very succinctly, he said, because it wouldn't be convenient.
Mm-hmm. It's a theoretical choice. We want everything to be divisible down to the primes. Yeah, having one a prime number would be a mess.
Yeah, but 100 years ago, there was a good majority of people who said that one is a prime, but then they said one is a number, is not even a number. But be that as it may, it seems to, solipsism and that seem to disturb people because, especially the experts, because it means, okay, is what I'm doing, does it have any value? You know?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to this whole idea. Rene Descartes said, how do you know you're not being fooled into thinking the world around you exists when none of it is real? And he said, the evil genius could be giving you the sense that you're living in a world with physical objects around you and other people, and none of that is real. You'll find that in the ancient Indian traditions, in the ancient Chinese traditions. The Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi said, yeah, how do I know I feel like I'm Zhuangzi, how do I know I'm not a butterfly dreaming that he's Zhuangzi? And this is very destabilizing, for people. Maybe none of this is potentially none of this is real. For Descartes, it was a challenge that, well, if I can't know about that, then I can't know anything about the world around me. He did say there's one thing I can know, at least I can know that I exist. I think, here I am thinking, I think, therefore I am. I exist. That's one thing I get to be certain of. But hey, if Descartes was right, I don't even get to be certain of you, let alone other people.
Well, you approach it in a really interesting way, and one that many people are familiar with, which is good, which is Plato's Cave. But then I didn't know about Mary and her TV. I had never heard of that. So talk a little bit about that, because I think people understand the shadows and going up to the surface.
Yeah, so Plato's Cave is the idea that maybe we could be prisoners, imprisoned on the cave walls, just seeing shadows of the genuine reality. And the genuine reality is actually out there in the sunlight, but that's not what we're experiencing. Actually, in the book, I've got an illustration of Plato's Cave for the 21st century, with a whole bunch of people chained up inside virtual reality machines inside the cave. And then there's Mark Zuckerberg running the whole show on his laptop. So that's like a dystopian vision of virtual reality as a version of Plato's Cave.
Yeah,
but
go ahead.
Go on. Mary in the black and white room is the idea that Mary, her whole life, has only seen black and white TV, never experienced color. Then one day she sees color for the first time. It's like, oh my God, that is amazing. I could never have known about that. Even knowing about the whole physical universe would never have told me what it's like to see a red rose. So that for her is this amazing new transformative experience that some philosophers have used to argue that consciousness goes beyond the physical world. Because Mary might know everything about the brain and physical processes, but she didn't know what it would be like to experience red. That was kind of like leaving the cave for Mary. The guy walks out of Plato's cave and sees reality for the first time. Mary leaves the black and white room and sees colors for the first time.
Yeah, but in Plato's Cave, when the guy comes back in, he's a pariah, he's a villain, and that happens in our world too now. People aren't looked upon kindly who posit the idea of something different or extra.
Yeah, well, this is controversial territory. Some people like the non-natural universe with all kinds of rich things, but reductionism is a big force in our current climate, and a lot of people want it to be very simple, very physical. Actually, my first book, I used considerations like this to argue that consciousness is not physical. And I mean, I got an audience for it that was good, but there was also a lot of pushback. It's a reductionism versus non-reductionism about reality is one of the big issues of our time, I think.
Well, in the morning, many mornings, I wake up and I go, what the hell is this? I honestly do. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. And given what your expertise is, do you ever feel that way? Independent of your study, like Mary knows everything about color.
What the hell is this universe anyway? I can just get boggled by the fact that anything exists at all. Look, why is there anything in this world as opposed to nothing? Why shouldn't there just have been like total void or not even that? But here's the world, it exists. And not only that, it contains consciousness. It contains meaning. It contains value. It contains knowledge. How is it we can actually know about the world? That seems like some kind of miracle. So yeah, I think you can just get boggled by the fact that there's anything in reality at all. And then we say, of all the realities that could have existed, why this one? Why did it have to go this way? Why did I have to exist? Why did you have to exist? Why do you have to be in this world of 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time? Do all those possible worlds exist? Maybe out there somewhere.
It's like the strong anthropic principle, like we're just a one-off. I mean, if ice sunk instead of floating, then life wouldn't exist. But for some reason, ice floats as a solid, what the hell? And so that's another way of looking at it. Or, let's do a complete non sequitur. Let's talk about your synesthesia, because I had it too.
Oh, really? What kind of synesthesia did you have?
I still have it because all the days of the week, I had it big time, but all the days of the week have colors, like Monday's light green, Tuesday's brown, Wednesday's dark green, Thursday's dark brown, Friday's orange, Saturday's yellow, Sunday's white. And that's it. There's no question in my mind. Talk about yours. Yeah,
well, when I was a kid, I had music color synesthesia. So I'd hear a song or a chord, and that would have a certain color to me. Actually, a lot of the time, they were just kind of dull colors. Murky brown, murky green, maybe it's like a whole bunch of things mixed together. But every now and then I get something that was like I remember Here, There, and Everywhere by the Beatles was a beautiful, pure shade of red, those chords at the beginning. There was one that was Stairway to Heaven was kind of a deep green. And yeah, it just seemed obvious to me these songs had these colors. I thought it was this way for everyone. And then, yeah, around age 20, it went away. I gather it's quite common for synesthesia to go away after childhood. And I just got a journal entry saying, hey, songs don't have colors anymore. What happened? I missed that.
Yeah. Another way in which we have similar lives is you and I are both fans of Ultimate Frisbee.
Very good. Where did I even mention Ultimate Frisbee? I might have mentioned that somewhere once. Yeah, when I was in grad school at Indiana University in Bloomington, there was a big crowd of people would play Ultimate on the university lawns, and I just go down there. It's never terribly fit, but it was a good way of at least making some attempt to stay in shape. Haven't played Ultimate for a while now. How about you?
My brother and my brother was like a world champion, but we just still have how many football field goals can we score? And we have orange cones and we just keep moving back further and further. One time, wind aided, I threw a 90-yard field goal, but now my son makes fun of me and says because I'm an old man, but I still throw a 65-yard one. There's this book called Ultimate Glory by David Gesner. You ever hear that book? It's all about ultimate.
No, I got to read that.
Yeah, Ultimate Glory. Well, since you mentioned Indiana, and since I always move all over the place, talk a little bit about Douglas Hofstadter, how he affected your life, and Gödel Escher Bach, and more specifically, I Am a Strange Loop.
Yeah, well, Gödel Escher Bach, that's a book he wrote when, probably 1977, when I was 11 years old. And I just came across this book sometime, maybe a year or so later. And for a kid like me, it was amazing. I was a math geek, and I was totally into to math and logic and science. And yeah, Gödel Escherbach had a lot of that. It was really an introduction to logical ideas and math and some bits of science. But at the same time, it also opened you out to so much more. I mean, Gödel Escherbach, the title, Gödel's a mathematician, Escher is an artist, Bach is Bach, the composer. So like it is art and music right there. But also so much of the book was it was philosophy. It was thinking about the human mind, whether minds could be present in machines, and yeah, what all that means, all the issues I've gone on to think about my whole life. That was kind of what introduced me to it. So Gödel Escherbach, and then he had a follow-up book, The Mind's Eye, co-edited with the philosopher Dan Dennett, which had a bunch of amazing stories, more specifically focused on the mind and on consciousness. So I loved all of these works by Hofstadter. So my first degree was in math in Australia, in Adelaide. And then I went to Oxford to continue studying math for a doctorate. But somewhere along the way, I got just these thinking about the mind and thinking about consciousness kind of took over. And I thought, this is really what I want to do. So I thought, well, how do I do this? So I don't know, maybe I'll send a letter to Hofstadter. So I wrote up a few ideas, and it's out of the blue. Doug, whose books it's been so influential for me, I sent him not even an email, a paper letter, and he goes nothing. And he wrote back a long, enthusiastic letter, and we started going back and forth. And before long, he said, "Hey, why don't you, since you're trying to figure out what to do next, why don't you come to Indiana and work with me on these things?" And I said, "Wow, that sounds great." And then I said, "Where's Indiana?" I had an American flatmate at the time said, "Oh, you don't want to go there. It's all cornfields. It's all flat." But then I went out to visit Bloomington. I found it's in southern Indiana, and the glaciers stop 20 miles north of there. So it's actually
Yeah, I like
it's
that.
it's kind of gorgeous.
I was going to say, with regard to I Am a Strange Loop, and this doesn't sound good, but when I read it, I felt as if, at least in part, he was trying to bring back his wife.
I think, in a way, I think Doug is explicit about that. Yeah, Carol, his wife, was amazing. I knew her very well, and she was such a positive force in her life, incredibly smart and loving. And then a year after I left, they were on a trip to Italy, and she suddenly started getting intense headaches, and within a week or two, she was dead of a brain tumor, which was, of course, just totally devastating. And one of the ways that Doug has dealt with that is by keeping Carol alive by thinking about her. It's part of his theory of consciousness that it partly extends beyond ourselves. The self is a pattern which can exist in other people as much as within ourselves. So you think, okay, while he's remembering Carol, then some part of Carol continues to exist. And if he writes about Carol, then some more of Carol is reverberating out there. So I think, he already, I Am a Strange Loop was like that, but it also came up in some of his earlier books, Le Tombeau de Marot.
Oh yeah, yes. And she wrote one of the translations, right?
Yeah. When I first got to Indiana, Doug was in the middle of this. It's like he asked everyone in sight to translate this piece of French doggerel, Ma Mignonne, by this guy Clément Marot. But some people came up with brilliant translations, and like into English, into German, into code, into English without using the letter E. And Carol had some brilliant ones.
Yeah, that was a lovely book. I understood why the poem was supposed to be cute. I understand that, my petite mignon. But it also was very deep for me, because it made you think on several levels, right?
Yeah, translation is all about trying to crystallize an idea, and Doug has always been about thinking about concepts, thinking about ideas, and he ended up actually translating Pushkin, Eugene Onegin, and so on into English without even knowing Russian. It's like, but I can triangulate through enough of these existing translations, I can get in on the ideas.
Yeah, I once bought 6 translations of Siddhartha, and I realized, oh yeah, and I used to read Hermann Hesse a lot. And then when I went to college, there was the German professor there, and I said to him, so what do you think of this translation? And he looks at me, he was kind of mean. He looks at me and he goes, why would I read a translation?
Mm-hmm. Fair enough.
Yeah.
Although it's interesting, some German philosophy students I've talked to have said when they first read Kant, they read it in German, it was really hard. Then they read an English translation by Norman Kemp Smith, and that was so much easier. It's like, because the translator actually simplified. Of course, the real Kant scholars will say that's not the real thing, but I have heard people saying they liked reading Kant in the English translation, even if they speak German.
That goes back directly to your concept, as you explain it, of reality. You know, you're not reading the book. You're reading the book through the filter of somebody else's consciousness. You know?
Yeah, well, so do we ever get reality unfiltered through consciousness? You know, we get reality as experienced through our own consciousness, but so much of what we know is social. It comes from other people. I see a rather large number of books behind you right there, and yeah, a fair amount. And you know, like I have a million books, many of which I haven't read, but just having them there gives me kind of more knowledge. And then 99.99% of what I know has come from things I've read. So that is how knowledge works in a social age.
Yeah. My entire school year, my entire school career, I never did homework once. It was just reading. That's all it was.
I see. You never thought of it as homework.
No, that's what I thought that was the right. Anyway, I end up talking about me. So I own a bookstore, and everyone says you can't judge a book by its cover, but everybody does. So you have your book behind you. So let's sell it. Show the cover and explain it, because it's a beautiful cover. Okay,
here we go. Well, this is Reality Plus, and it has a wonderful picture of a butterfly. Partly, I mentioned the Zhuangzi who dreamed that he was a butterfly, and then he worries, am I a butterfly dreaming? He's Zhuangzi. So there is a butterfly, which turns out to be not just a dream butterfly, but a digital butterfly, a virtual butterfly. And some people would then say a virtual butterfly can't be real. But I want to say, no, virtual objects can be real too, and a digital butterfly, not the same as a biological butterfly, but still a perfectly real object. So again, here we've got some little hints that it might be digital, a few digital glitches. But yeah, the book is Reality Plus. There's more in reality than you might have thought. There's physical reality, but there's virtual worlds too. There's virtual realities. There's augmented realities that we're creating. It could turn out that our own world is a virtual reality, is a simulated reality. Then there's even more out there in reality. So Reality Plus is like this multiverse of many worlds, plus the metaverse of virtual worlds. And I think this is just so interesting for a philosopher. So the subtitle is Virtual Worlds and the Problems of Philosophy. I think, thinking philosophically about these virtual worlds and this technology is just A, philosophically interesting, B, very practically relevant, because this technology is coming. But also, I think thinking about the technology can actually help us with some very traditional issues in philosophy, like what is reality? What is the nature? How can we know about the external world? What is it to lead a good life? So I call this technophilosophy, using philosophy to think about technology and using technology to think about philosophy. And this book is basically an exploration in technophilosophy. Okay, it's a little bit thick. It's got 500 pages or so, but very readable, and it has some great illustrations along the way. I mentioned, let's see. Here is, for example, is a Zhuangzi and the butterfly. Is he Zhuangzi dreaming he's a butterfly, or is he a butterfly dreaming that he's Zhuangzi? And on it goes from there. Did I plug it well enough?
That was good. Oh, except for one thing, which again, as a bookseller, was there actually a decision-making process in your mind as to whether to use the word plus or to use the symbol for plus?
Yeah, it's interesting. My first instinct was to use the word Reality Plus. I thought that was a bit more conservative and a bit more dignified, but But the consensus of people I talked to was that was just half-hearted. That wasn't really embracing the concept to use the word plus. Use the symbol plus, it's like, hey, that's much more techno, futuristic. Okay, it does have the downside of sounding a little bit like a streaming service. Paramount Plus, HBO Plus, Disney Plus, Apple TV Plus, and so on. On the other hand, that's not totally inappropriate. Maybe in future we'll have reality streaming services. You'll be able to choose your own reality from the system of Reality Plus. But in the end, I thought people did say that for what is it? It's search engine optimization. The plus can be an issue.
No, actually, I thought, I wonder if it's going to be hard to find this book. And then I realized that the plus sign actually made it easier to find the book through Google searches or even on Amazon.
Interesting.
Because there aren't any other books that use the plus, or very few. So
yeah, but sometimes some search engines just ignore the plus. So they think it's just like a random symbol and they just give you a search on reality. But if they do treat the plus as a plus, then yeah, that's maybe it's a selling point. Next year, everyone's going to be using plus in their books. Maybe
yeah, and like I said, the streaming quick. All do, because plus, plus. Oh yeah, well that goes to good. Plus is good. What does it mean? And this is, I guess, it's not that I take issue with you. It's simply that I don't understand what you're saying. You say, what does it mean to lead a good life? And good is a strange word it's not a strange word for a philosopher to say, but it seems like it's a strange word for someone who studies human consciousness to say. It's totally subjective.
Yeah, I mean, good is so many different things that can be meant by good. But I mean, there's like personally good, like good for you, valuable from your perspective. Then there's like morally good, or like objectively good for everybody. Actually, the first thing I try to argue is you can at the very least live a meaningful life in VR. That doesn't mean it's good or bad. It just means it's, it's full of meaning. It has value. You get meaning in your life through, I don't know, your relationships with other people, with the world, your experiences, the communities you're in. I think you can do all that in virtual reality. But furthermore, I think you can actually lead a good life. I mean, I think you can it's possible to lead a very bad life in VR. VR could be exploitative. It could be miserable. It could be like the Matrix, where you're under the control of all these people, and that could be totally dystopian. I think but there's also utopian possibilities in virtual reality as well. New communities, new bodies, new forms of experience, new projects, and so on. So, I mean, you're right that in a certain sense, what's good for you is partly up to what you judge to be good. I would say that, I mean, the same thing is kind of true for meaning. Why are some things meaningful? The physical world isn't intrinsically meaningful. We are conscious beings. We invest the world with meaning. And same for virtual worlds. I think virtual worlds may not be intrinsically meaningful, but we can live in them and invest them with meaning. And you were saying this is subjective. Yeah, meaning is where we find it. What's good is what we take to be good. And I think there's a large element of truth to that, but that's kind of how goodness and meaning work in physical reality. And I think something like that can apply in principle just as well to virtual realities.
And one of the things you just brought up was the Matrix, and what makes the book accessible, will make the book accessible to a lot of people, is you use mostly movies to demonstrate a lot of aspects of what you're talking about with regard to virtuality and consciousness. And what about that? What made you do that, and how did you choose the movies? I was thinking of the 3 Men in Black movies, where it ends and they find themselves in a locker looking out at the real world, or the little girl who's playing marbles with the entire cosmos, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Yeah. Here's another nice illustration. This is Morpheus and Neo inside the Matrix, and Neo says, "Oh, this isn't real," and Morpheus says, "What is real? How do you define real?" And that is just like a classic philosophical question, illustrated amazingly vividly in this movie. And I find that happens again and again in the Matrix movies, especially the first one, which is not just a science fiction classic, but a philosophical classic. I actually found that the first movie useful for me in my philosophical thinking. I've been thinking about some issues about reality, But suddenly this idea of the universe is a simulation, illustrated so vividly by the Matrix, that actually 20 years ago, I ended up writing a philosophy article inspired by the Matrix. I was invited to write it for the Matrix website because the producers of the movies had a deep interest in philosophy. And I was just thinking along these lines. So I wrote an article called "The Matrix as Metaphysics." How, yeah, we could be living in a simulation like the Matrix, but if we are, we're still living in a world where things are real. If we're in the Matrix, yeah, the world we're living in is digital. This coffee cup is a digital object, but it's no less real for all that. So I wanted to say the Matrix should be viewed as a kind of a metaphysics for reality, what's sometimes called an it from bit picture of reality. If we're in the Matrix, the world around us is digital, it's made of bits, but I wanted to say it's no less real. And yeah, it was that these science fiction works are just brilliant philosophical thought experiments. Lay out a situation, we're in a simulation, see what happens. And yeah, many of the greatest science fiction writers have also been great philosophers. So I quote Stanislav Lem and Philip K. Dick, the Wachowski sisters, Ursula Le Guin, and so on constantly in this book, partly because people know them and it provides an anchor point, but partly because they've often thought as deeply about these scenarios as anybody else.
Yeah, those are good hooks for the reader. And the other good hook that I liked was in the beginning, how you presaged the rest of the book by referencing in color the in chapter 5, I will tell you this. Mm-hmm. And that's always nice. And if you want to, you can skip to chapter 5. You don't have any objection to that, right?
Totally. A lot of these chapters are made to be pick and choose. You can go in different orders at different points. They're kind of anal retentive about this. Do you want to read it? If you're interested in this, then read this chapters. In this, then read this chapters. At a certain point, someone said, "Okay, too much of that. Put that in a footnote." So now there's a footnote where you can get a whole bunch of the different paths through the book. People are going to find their own, but yeah, there's a lot of different stuff in this book. So lots of different paths through, depending if you're more interested in the more abstract philosophical issues and the practical issues of coming virtual reality. Are you interested in getting an introduction to philosophy? One thing this book tries to do is actually introduce a lot of traditional philosophy along the way. Are you interested in stuff at the cutting edge, more science, more technology, more ethics and value? I think, yeah, there's just a million different paths through here.
Do you remember the black cat scene, the deja vu scene in me?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sometimes I think like we haven't talked about this like concept of the multiverse, Spider-Man, and a frothy universe. So sometimes like if you ever like drive down the road and you think you see a cow, but then as you get closer, you realize it's just a sign or a fire hydrant or a tree or something like that. I always thought that's a split off. Like, I don't think you ever die. I think you just keep splitting off. But since there's an infinite amount of time and space and particles, you're always splitting off.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a different way of looking at it.
Yeah, well, this is actually positively suggested to some people by quantum mechanics, where there's this many worlds idea and that we're constantly entering superpositions of different states that dissociate from each other. And I'm thinking, okay, am I going to go to a movie tonight, or I'm going to go out for dinner? Well, okay, one version of me goes to a movie, the other version of me goes out to dinner. And this is actually happening constantly if you buy into this many worlds view of quantum mechanics, which is actually surprisingly popular. So yeah, on that view, it's the whole thing is a multiverse. Once you add in all the virtual worlds in there too, all the simulations we create, simulations within simulations, maybe there'll be there'll be multiverses within simulated multiverses within physical multiverses. So multiverses stacked on top of metaverses.
I don't know if he still does this, but one of the most enjoyable things that I've read about is the Dalai Lama each year would meet with quantum physicists, and each year they got closer and closer to the meaning of both being essentially equivalent. I thought that was so cool.
Yeah, there's a lot of deep links there between science, philosophy, and religion. I don't know if it's an overall convergence, but there are at least portions where, yeah, quantum mechanics, oh my God, consciousness, oh my God, psychology, everything. Yeah, there are people obsessed by drawing those connections.
which goes back to if I was playing devil's advocate with you, it's like, yeah, I remember having these discussions in my dorm room in an altered state with my friends at 3 o'clock in the morning in 1970. So, okay, I thought about all these things then. So you've said, you've acknowledged your ignorance of whether or not any of these things, and it's difficult for a philosopher whether they're true or not. So what do you want? So what do you think the reader can take away from this? Because it's a jumping off point, I think the book is.
Mm-hmm.
What's your idea of what the reader can take away from reading this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's certainly all this has its origins and big, wild philosophical ideas. But it's tricky in philosophy. People think, is it just that what you say, you can just make up anything and what you say goes? The trick with philosophy is you actually need to be clear and rigorous and make arguments for your view. So even though the territory is very nebulous, what we try to do is to actually reason about the nebulous, set forth our premises, set out arguments, try and be rigorous in reasoning about these very wild ideas. And one trouble is, of course, we don't immediately come to definite conclusions. It's not like science where you can do some experiments and basically establish something. I mean, a lot of areas of science started out as philosophy. Isaac Newton considered himself a philosopher, but he figured out how to address these problems in a way that people could agree on. And then the science of physics got founded, split off from philosophy. And this happened again and again with other fields, psychology, economics, linguistics. So what's left in philosophy now is kind of this too hard basket of problems that we don't yet have ways to make progress on scientifically, but I think we can still reason about them rigorously and try and kind of set out the options for how to understand reality. I guess if I think there's a single moral here, there's more to reality than you might have thought in Reality Plus. Especially when it comes to these virtual worlds, which people might think, okay, these are fake or fictional or escapist. No, I think these virtual worlds, these digital worlds we're creating, are potentially real, genuine parts of reality, as real in their way as the physical world. And these worlds are coming as the technology is coming. So what I would like to think of this is a reasoned way of working through the idea that there's more to reality than we might have thought. Maybe maybe we're in a simulation and there's a reality consisting of the simulator. Maybe we are ourselves simulators creating new worlds through virtual reality. And you get versions of some very traditional big ideas like, oh my God, what's the nature of God? Is there a God? And here, we get through the simulation idea, well, maybe there's a simulator in the next universe up. And suddenly we have a way of thinking about gods and creators, which is potentially consistent with science and a naturalistic worldview. So I guess I just like to think the ideas still are big and nebulous, but somehow there is a rigorous way to think about these very big ideas about reality.
The difficult thing is what you were saying about experimentally. What you're doing in your specialty is you always have to think, reader or not, that you are studying the tool that you want to study with that very tool. And so it's not only recursive, it's like, how can you, it's like if you wanted to fix a hammer by using the hammer that was broken with that hammer, it's undoable.
I don't know. Can you use a microscope to look at a microscope? Just focus the lens on the right way on its internal parts. Like, you can do that. You can use a camera to take a picture of a camera in a mirror.
Yeah, but that's a simulation.
I don't know, but I think, consciousness, I can use my own consciousness to study my own consciousness. I mean, maybe there are limits there. Doug Hofstadter actually had a brilliant illustration of this back in Gödel Bach, where if a painting tries to depict itself, there's always going to be a hole left at the center. But that doesn't mean you can't depict or study yourself. It just means maybe there's always going to be some always there's going to be some limits. So yeah, maybe I can't know every fact about my consciousness just introspectively. That's why we bring in science. That's why we bring in other people.
And the thing about it is, even though he thought that GEB was misinterpreted, part of the reason he wrote I'm a Strange Loop answers the question that I was saying, is that because you can recognize Gödel, Escher, Bach were basically doing the same thing with the fugue, with the hand drawing itself, and with the theory of incompleteness. Obviously I should have been thinking of this for the past 40 years, but since we were just talking about it, it's the first time I really actually visualized that. But that's what it is, right?
Yeah, they're all jumping through levels and then getting into these circles, which is the strange loop. In Bach, you go up and you go up and you go up and you go up. Oh, and here we are back again to where we started. In Escher, there's the infinitely descending staircase, and Gödel finds his own way of jumping through these paradoxical levels with sentences like mathematics, like I cannot prove this sentence. This sentence cannot be proved, and yeah, it's another kind of strange loop. So Doug finds these loops everywhere, and I don't know. He thinks that they're the key to human consciousness. I don't know that I think these strange loops are the key to human consciousness, but they're incredibly important, especially when it comes to self-consciousness, our awareness of ourself as self. That is so deeply self-referential that I think these loops play a very central role. I mean, I don't know. For me, there are some simpler parts of consciousness, like experiencing the color red that we talked about before. Is that a strange loop? I'm not sure. For me, that's more like raw perception, more primitive than any strange loop. But Doug is going to say that there's a strange loop at the heart of all that as well. Maybe that's a point on which we still disagree.
That's interesting, because I was going to ask that. So in academia, if you will, you guys refute each other. But what is the refutation? What are you guys arguing? What are you guys arguing about? Anyway,
I guess Doug is basically, very broadly speaking, on the reductionist side. He's a very sophisticated reductionist, but he thinks that ultimately we are going to explain consciousness in terms of physical and computational processes in the brain, and yeah, partly through these loopy processes, which are recursive and so on. And I really respect that viewpoint. But yeah, what I actually argued first in my PhD when I was working with Doug, and then later on in my book, The Conscious Mind, was that actually you're never fully going to explain subjective experience in terms of processes in the brain or computational processes. These will help with the easy problems of explaining behavior, as I call them, but not the hard problem of explaining subjective experience. And this, I guess, was the fundamental difference. I thought there's a hard problem here, which standard neuroscience and AI and so on isn't going to address, whereas Doug thought it's all ultimately a strange loop. If we explain that loop well enough, we'll explain consciousness. So in his book, he says, wow, it's so weird to me. This guy Chalmers, become known for the hard problem, was actually working on those ideas here in my lab, right around. That's not quite a traitor in our midst. I still have a very good relationship with Doug, but it's like, oh my God, it's like, who knew that I would be partly responsible for creating this monster? But
you just said something that no one understands. I don't know anyone who understands. I don't understand it. And that's what you said is the hard problem. You're the expert in the hard problem. No, explain the hard problem, because really no one understands it.
People understand the problem. They just don't have a solution to it. The hard problem is pretty simple. It's how do physical processes in the brain somehow give rise to the subjective experience of the mind and the world? And yes, this subjective experience is something all of us have, just the experience of seeing colors, like seeing red that we talked about, feeling pain, thinking a thought, calling up an image of your hometown or your family. All of this feels like something from the inside. And the question is, why? Why does having a brain feel like something from the inside? It feels like all of this we could have been like androids or robots or zombies doing all this. And it felt like nothing from the inside. We'd just be giant computers. But in fact, we have subjective experience. So the hard problem is, how can you explain that in terms of the brain? The easy problems is explaining things like behavior. How is it that we walk and talk? And there's a standard paradigm for using brain processes to explain that. But why should it feel like something from the inside? That's the hard problem.
Funny, yesterday I interviewed the woman who wrote Reading Lolita in Tehran. And at the beginning, I said, you're probably going to be irritated with me at the end of this interview before we started. And she goes, and you'll probably be irritated with me. And she goes, and that's a good thing. And I thought about it because I was thinking today, your book is frustrating, but that sounds pejorative, but it's not at all. The frustration is born of, this is a hard problem. It's a hard, really hard, maybe the hardest problem there is. And that reminded me, I don't remember whether you talked about it or not, in Blade Runner, like at the very end, where there's this whole cult following, wondering whether or not Harrison Ford was a replicant himself. Remember that?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, that's a good one. There's a good one, right? This goes right along with what you've been saying the whole hour.
Yeah.
How do you know?
People worry about Star Trek. Is Data, who's an android, is he conscious, or is he just a zombie? And in the book, I've got a picture of two theories of Commander Data in Star Trek, and one of them he's conscious, and the other one he's a zombie. Here we go: conscious Data and zombie Data. Does Data actually experiencing all this stuff from the inside, as depicted here? There's his consciousness, or is he just a zombie? Feels like nothing from the inside. Yeah, that's the same issue, and yet Blade Runner runs with it. You get this in Black Mirror. It's everywhere in science fiction.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, if someone goes to your Wikipedia entry before they buy the book, which I find in my bookstore a lot of people do, the thing about you that's, I wouldn't say it's not unique, but it's just the idea that you admit initially, the first admission you make is you have no idea. Right? You kind of, am I wrong? You kind of say that, right?
I think there are deep mysteries here. I do think there are things we can say about them, but part of what makes them mysteries is we collectively don't have the solutions yet. I am prepared to speculate about possible solutions, but absolutely say, it's not yet at the point where this is science. It's not yet at the point where we have proper theories.
Well, actually then, if both of us are here, I've really enjoyed this discussion, but maybe I've enjoyed it because I'm really a good person at creating discussions but yeah, here I go again. Anyway, I really have enjoyed having you here. It's a great book. It now, because we can put it out, it's on the front table, it'll be in the window. And again, the cover thing, that butterfly is great. People just will pick it up, and publishers know what to put on the cover because they need to sell books, but it's a great cover.
Fantastic. And if all this is a simulation that you put on, we'll just thank you for putting me into this simulation. It was a most enjoyable one.
I agree. Thank you for putting me in yours.
Cheers.
Okay. Maybe we'll talk again soon. Maybe not. Okay.
Very
Bye-bye.
good. Cheers.
Cheers.